Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Farwa Aamer, the Director of South Asia Initiatives here at the Asia Society Policy Institute in New York. And today I'm truly delighted to be in conversation with Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, founder and CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, one of Asia's leading policy research institutions and among the world's 20 best climate think tanks. He's also the South Asia envoy to COP30, which will take place in Brazil in November this year. Dr. Ghosh, welcome. It's truly a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me here.
For those who may not be familiar with his distinguished career, a little bit of background on Dr. Ghosh. He has played a formative role in creating the International Solar Alliance and was the founding board member of the Clean Energy Access Network. Dr. Ghosh has years of experience in advising governments, civil society, and international organizations around the world on climate action. In October 2024, the Government of India appointed him to the Commission for Air Quality Management. He currently co-chairs the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on the Energy Nexus and has also served on Government of India's G20 Finance Track Advisory, as well as advised the Sherpa Track for India's G20 presidency in 2022-2023. In the same year, the UN Secretary General appointed him to the high-level expert group on the credibility and accountability of net zero. Of course, he's no stranger to the Asia Society. In 2022, the Asia Society was proud to honor him for the Asia Game Changer Award for his NCEEW's incredible work, which is making a real difference for India and the entire planet. And we're grateful to welcome you today and hear from you in your capacity as a special envoy representing a key region which is home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world and has a vast, dynamic human capital base. Yet the region stands on the front lines of climate crises, from floods and droughts to heat waves and cyclones. The impacts of climate change threaten not only the region's growth trajectory, but also its infrastructure, ecosystems, lives and livelihoods of millions. The recent devastating cloudbursts and flash floods in India, Pakistan and Nepal, claiming lives and sweeping away entire communities, are stark reminders of the urgency of the climate situation in the region. Without decisive and forward-looking investments in adaptation and resilience, regional collaboration and sustained international support, these risks could unravel decades of hard-won economic gains and development potential for the region. With so much to unpack on this topic, I cannot wait to hear from the expert himself. So without further ado, let's just dive into our conversation today. Dr. Ghosh, from your work across South Asia for years now, how would you summarize the current climate risk picture for the region? What is most urgently sort of demanding attention today? Is it the loss and damage portion? Is it the food, water, energy nexus part of it? Is it the climate finance gaps? And what indicators or trends are you monitoring and would you like to signal to explain to our audience that business as usual would not work for the region anymore?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be back here at the Asia Society. I think, right to your question, the biggest risk I see for South Asia in particular and Asia more generally is how the non-linear nature of climate risks is becoming more and more apparent. What I mean by that is what was an extreme event yesterday becomes normal today. What seems extreme today becomes normal tomorrow. Why is this problematic? Because this is also, as you said in the introduction, this is also the region where you have fast-growing economies, where new infrastructure is being put in place, whether it's housing or bridges and roads, etc., where industry is being put in place. So as the capital expenditure increases in these economies, the damage to the economy then also increases with these climate extremes. There are a few specific things we should be watching out for in particular. Let's take heat stress. I think in South Asia, by the end of the century, we are looking at the number of days with temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius would double from 100 today to 200. What does that mean? It means very difficult to do outdoor work. It means your infrastructure begins to get stretched, and there's a public health crisis and so forth. The second indicator I would watch out for are what I call hydrometeorological disasters. That is floods, droughts, cyclones, and those impact the built infrastructure, they impact lives, they destroy livelihoods. The third indicator I would be looking out for is how precipitation patterns are changing. In India, for instance, my organization has looked at the sub-district level. We got about 700 odd districts, but we got 4,500 plus sub-districts. And we see that for 11% of those sub-districts, the southwest monsoon has gone down. For about 55% of those sub-districts, it's gone up. But where it's going up, it's not a good thing just because there's more rain. It's coming down hard, it's coming down fewer days. Why does this matter? Because it destroys crops, it destroys farmers' livelihoods, it puts social pressure. I think over the last 2 decades, about half of all of South Asia's population has been impacted by some kind of extreme weather. And this is only going to get worse. So we are running 2 races. One, to grow our economies and invest in human development. And second, to build resilience against all the shocks that are coming our way.
And thank you for that. That's really profound. Nothing is happening in silos anymore, right? There's a direct link to how the climate crisis is unfolding and how it's going to impact, particularly for South Asia, because it has a massive youth population. So the factors that you mentioned and how they impact the economic trajectory of these countries has a direct implication how the youth see itself growing, and that's why climate is a big concern for that part of the world. I do want to come to our next question here, which is directly speaking to your role as the South Asia envoy for COP30. And in that capacity, you've been convening across the regions, you've been meeting a variety of stakeholders and regional governments as well. How have those consultations gone in practice? I also understand that these are not easy times for regional coordination. There's a lot happening politically within the region. There are a number of external geopolitical shocks. So with everything that's going on, how are we ensuring that within the region, the climate agenda does not get compromised and it remains a priority? And if I may ask, what particularly gives you hope and optimism about regional collaboration in South Asia with regards to climate?
Well, I think there's no denying that our region and the world more generally, we are buffeted by internal challenges. We are buffeted by regional tensions, and we are all impacted by geopolitical shifts. That being said, what gives me hope is actually when I speak to stakeholders, both within government and outside of government, whether it's private sector, academia, think tanks, there is certainly a recognition that the one common threat we're all dealing with is the climate crisis. For reasons I explained earlier, whether it's heat, whether it's precipitation changes, extreme weather, and so forth. But there's also recognition that the nature of these crises extend beyond the political boundaries. South Asia is a region which extends from the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush in the north, all the way down to small island states in the south, whether it's Sri Lanka or Maldives. The Himalayas are the youngest mountains in the world. They are fragile ecosystems. How glaciers are shifting there impacts the flow of perennial rivers, but also impacts how glacial lake outburst floods suddenly creates a stress point. Land degradation then impacts not only landslides in an acute way, but has chronic crises in terms of degradation of soils, which are important for our agriculture and food security. So these are issues that are spanning across the political borders, and there is certainly recognition that this is a common challenge. What else am I hearing? I'm hearing that there has to be a lot more investment in adaptation and resilience. I'm hearing that there has to be some kind of coordination platforms to share knowledge, to share experiences, to share information and data. I'm also hearing the opportunity for creating platforms for regional investment, because investment in one type of resilience infrastructure in one place will only be as impactful if it's also done somewhere else. So, notwithstanding the local and global political shifts and challenges that we all encounter, I think there is clearly a recognition that this is a common threat and we can't take our eyes off this ball.
That's very important what you mentioned, with regards to data sharing, knowledge sharing, having sort of that shared platform, because South Asia is a region where there's so much shared fabric, whether it's culture, but climate particularly is a shared challenge. And hydrological data sharing is very important because there are a number of transboundary rivers, agricultural being the heart of the economy it's one of the primary goals. But you did touch upon two stakeholders, the civil society and the private sector. Could you expand a little bit on how you see them stepping up, particularly in the region, to support either, say, mobilization of finance for some of these climate-oriented goals?
Well, let's start with civil society. I think, and what I mean by civil society is a combination of, say, on-ground institutions, research institutions and think tanks, and academia. Let's take a broad definition. I think one of the first things they have to do and are doing is data collection. My organization has been developing a high-resolution climate resilience atlas, but I've come across organizations in other countries, say ICIMOD, which is an inter-governmental agency but headquartered in Nepal, investing in that knowledge capacity that is needed and that can be shared and be transparent for us to make our respective decisions. The second thing is to build capacity. And what I mean by building capacity is how do we prepare our economies to absorb the kind of investment and capital that we need. So just because you want the money, and even if the money were outside the door, have you got your market design in place? Have you designed the auctions properly? Have you combined the state actors and the non-state actors, the private sector, etc., into contracts that are appropriately designed? All this is stuff that civil society can play an important role in. A third area is in developing new technologies and R&D, and especially in relatively poor but fast-growing regions, we don't have necessarily the luxury for only basic R&D. We have to look at what is called in technology terms beyond TRL, technology readiness level, beyond TRL 4, and taking it all the way to commercialization, TRL 7, 8, 9. Getting that, helping innovators, etc., cross that technological and commercial valley of death is something, again, where civil society comes in. When you piece these things together, information, capacity, innovation, and technology, you've prepared the ground for the other set of actors, i.e. the private sector. And we see this with large-scale projects, renewable energy projects, etc. India has already become the third largest solar country by deployment. But in Pakistan, there has been this huge surge of rooftop solar and distributed energy. In Bhutan and Bangladesh, huge investments in hydropower. Bhutan and Nepal. So we see the opportunity for private sector to play the large and the medium and the small projects, but that ground has to be prepared. So governments need to send the policy signals, civil society comes in to lay the groundwork, and private sector comes in with the investment.
So really the civil society is sort of the driving engine.
The bridge between government policy signaling and someone you and me, our savings going into a private entity that is then going to deploy clean infrastructure.
Well, that gives us more impetus to continue doing what we're doing and producing kind of research and analysis and making sure that climate crises and the attention that is needed it gets the attention on the policy discourse side of things and on the decision-making table. And we try and do this. We involve corporates a lot into our conversations, primarily because we want to be the bridge builder. So that's really good to know.
Can I just build on that point one more time, which is you've touched upon something different but very important, which is it's not just the prior work.
Right.
It's the post work also, meaning that we often have blind spots in terms of knowing what's happening on the ground.
Sure.
Not just what needs to happen, but what is happening or what gets done. And the role of civil society is also to shine a spotlight on that. Look, in this country or in this region, this much capacity got deployed, even when all the analysis would have initially suggested that's too expensive, won't happen, etc. How did they get it done? There's more investment coming. So someone else can learn from it. So shining that spotlight and reducing the information asymmetry actually is good, not just for policymakers to have more confidence, to double down and triple down on those commitments, but also opens up the region to the rest of the world.
Right.
We get on the radar of institutional investors elsewhere and say, that's interesting. There's a lot of exciting work going on with clean energy in South Asia. How do I tap into that opportunity?
So this is where the messaging part, the dissemination part, and the socialization of the research and the best practices happening on the ground become imperative.
Indeed.
Of course, we want to be able to touch on how some of the learnings from South Asia could be brought to other developing regions. But I do want to emphasize here for a conversation today that the COP30 is happening at roughly the 10-year mark since the Paris Agreement. From a regional perspective, how far do you think we've come? And are there any key successes and also missed opportunities that you see in the past decade you wish to highlight? And looking forward, now this is going to be a question I'm going to pose to you. If you could mandate, say, 3 fixes for the next 5 years that can help drive some of, say, effective policy implementation and show progress just beyond the commitments that we keep hearing a lot about, what would those fixes be or look like?
Well, first of all, let's reflect back on the 10 years. When the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, we were struggling, first and foremost, with not even having access to electricity, let alone clean electricity. In India, between 2017 and 2019, 130 million people got access to electricity for the first time. And household electrification rates went up to 99%. But we see similar efforts happening in other parts of the region as well. But the region has to do these 2 transitions simultaneously, electrification and decarbonization. So for that, we've also seen a huge investment in clean energy, large and small, as I was saying earlier. We are seeing a lot more focus also in the opportunity in the clean energy transition for rural areas, particularly, say, solar irrigation, or if you look at using clean energy to drive livelihoods, that is an opportunity that can be worth tens of billions of dollars. A third area where I see progress is in beginning to put in place some of the building blocks for resilience, early warning systems against cyclones and storm surges, etc., to protect lives at least. We have to take it forward to protect livelihoods and so forth. Is that enough? As I said earlier, the climate risks are non-linear, so the challenges will only keep rising. So we have to keep investing. And therefore, what do we do? What do we do more? You asked for 3 fixes. I don't know about fixes, but 3 additional things to go from catching the low-hanging fruit to climbing the tree a little higher. First, I think we do need to invest not just from a civil society perspective, but from a government perspective as well, much more on hyperlocal risk assessments. Right? So in South Asia and Asia more generally, we've got multiple agroclimatic zones. So generalizations don't help. So the more hyperlocal we get, for instance, my organization is developing heat action plans in cities at a neighborhood by neighborhood level. Last September, when I was here in New York, we made a promise, a commitment that we'd do it for 300 cities by 2027. We've already done it for 50 cities, and we're going to keep scaling this up. But that means from not just at a city level or a state level, at each individual neighborhood level, you know what kind of risks you're faced with. But we've got to collaborate a lot more for this. The second thing we have to do is start thinking about the decarbonization of our industry as well. Because for our region, deindustrialization is not an option. So we have to decarbonize without deindustrialization. How do you do that? Bulk of our industries in our region are small, medium enterprises. But they are also the ones from where we send out exports. It could be textiles, it could be processed food, etc. How do you electrify these small industries and make sure that electricity is clean? Because that cheaper source of clean electricity is also an investment in their export competitiveness. So once we start doing that, the energy transition doesn't seem something like far out in terms of, there's a solar project being built in a desert somewhere, or a wind turbine being put up on the shoreline somewhere. The energy transition begins to come closer to the economy. The third thing that has to happen is we have to start thinking about carbon prices within our economies. Because without that signal, the really important long-term transition doesn't happen. It doesn't have to be super high. There's a difference between a carbon price that is applicable in South Asia versus, say, in Europe or North America. But it begins to send a signal that every additional unit of GDP produced needs to incorporate and internalize the externality that we have. And that then helps us to start investing in the technologies and in the business models that keep us competitive and keep us going. It also leverages the power of the youth that you mentioned earlier. A young population raring to go, sees a carbon price, sees the technology, sees the opportunity, they will innovate a lot more. My daughter will be retiring or close to retiring when India hopes to hit net zero. So imagine it's her entire career and hundreds of millions of kids like her who have to, it does not matter whether they're working in energy transition or they're working on, space tech. It's their careers that will be defined by the long-term signals we send, and that's extremely important for our region.
So there's a lot of innovation that needs to be done. There's a lot of timely action that needs to happen. And of course, the onus is on sort of a lot of players, a lot of stakeholders coming together. But what you said about localized action, starting from, because you're looking at 1.4 billion plus population in India, it's 230 million over in Pakistan, and widely the region is 1.9 billion and growing.
Yeah, nearly a quarter of the world's population.
So exactly. And so it's a big region to service. And so you could start thinking big, but the action has to start small and sort of snowball, and you take your successes from a provincial, state, city, even community level. And there are some very good examples and best practice for that from India. But I do want to also discuss something that you've just come from earlier this month, I understand, is that New Delhi hosted the third regional dialogue of the Global Ethical Stocktake, which has been an important pillar of the regional mobilization process leading up to COP30. Since you were a leading participant there, could you talk to us a little bit more about the ethical framework that is needed beyond, we've talked a lot about the technical solutions here. So what's the ethical side of things to lead a more decisive climate action in the region and beyond?
Well, the Brazilian COP30 presidency has been organizing these regional or rather continental dialogues. They've done one in South America, one in Europe, etc., and one in Asia. Occurred in Delhi, but there were representatives from many countries. I think you're right. The ethical framing is very important, because if we only have a technocentric view of dealing with the climate crisis, we will not actually take pause to ask ourselves the really hard questions. So what's one of the hard questions? I would say there are three types of ethics we've got to explore. An ethic of empathy, an ethic of action, and an ethic of significance and insignificance. And let me just explain this. Convening where I was very grateful to be honored with the Game Changer Award. The biggest crisis the world is facing is not climate change. That's the second biggest crisis. The biggest crisis we're facing is a lack of empathy. Understanding the lived realities of people of other colors, cultures, genders, geographies. And we cannot, as you said, it's 1.9 billion people. Actually, we shouldn't be serving. We should be empowering. You can only empower if you understand their lived realities. If the forums at which you speak, I speak, things we analyze, if we are not reflecting our lived realities, it's someone else's framing that will decide what the pathways we have in front of us. So that's very important. The second is that we need an ethic of action. And this is what not just South Asia, but Asia and the Global South more generally is demonstrating, but it is not recognized or appreciated, that there's a lot more action happening than what is seemed. Whether, again, we can talk about clean energy, but we can talk about clean transportation. India sold 1.9 million electric vehicles last year. Not a single one of them was a Tesla. Our subsidies for electric transportation are for public transportation. Of those 1.9 million, 94% were two-wheelers and three-wheelers. Much of the remainder, there are about 63,000 e-buses that are being procured, etc. That is an ethic of action, but which is oriented towards equity. And the third, therefore, is the ethic of significance, meaning that we can feel despair that the climate crisis is destroying our economies, our infrastructure, etc. But we also must recognize that our actions, even in relatively poor economies, have outsized impact. We are insignificant as a species. The planet will be long here after we're gone. But recognizing our insignificance, putting a cap on our hubris, and yet recognizing that our small actions can also be significant at the scale at which we are operating is another different ethical framing. If we start incorporating these, this can become part of our lexicon, part of the language we use. So we are acting on climate not because of international negotiations. We're acting on climate not because someone else is telling us to do it. It's because we've understood each other's lived realities. We've understood that we've got to act, and we've understood that our actions will have an impact.
Right, no, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be provocative, it doesn't have to be controversial, it's simply shared concern.
Yes.
And humanitarian primarily, but also for the welfare of future generations, something that, regions like South Asia, because of the economic challenges and political challenges and security challenges for some countries, they're faced with. It's in the now. There's a very reactionary way of policy making, which also applies to climate. You see floods and droughts happening year-round, and you see action happening almost in the aftermath, and not they're not systems to kind of.
So this is the ethic of significance and insignificance. When a disaster hits, we feel insignificant. Our lives are washed away, our livelihoods are washed away, our homes are washed away. But that is disaster response. Disaster mitigation, disaster resilience in advance of the disaster is shifting from that insignificance to being significant. And that need not be just concretized infrastructure. You talked about communities. We have in the hill states, in Uttarakhand, community-run radio programs sending out early warning messages. Out in the east, on the Odisha coast, women-run self-help groups coming together to plant thousands of trees to build a buffer against storm surges as well as salty seawater intrusion. That's when we begin to realize that what seems insignificant when we are only in that reactionary mode can become significant when we become proactive and invest in resilience.
No, absolutely. And I really liked your formulation. It's less about servicing and more about empowering, and that's where we should be headed. But no, lastly, I do want to, because you're preparing for COP30, we're meeting during Climate Week and High-Level Week here in New York for the UN General Assembly. What would success look like for South Asia at this major multilateral forum that's taking place in November, but also beyond, because climate is not,
of course,
is not going to just be solved overnight, the challenges that we talked about. And what will be some of your sort of key priorities as a representative of the region to COP30 when you meet with all these leadership, authorities, stakeholders? But since we also have talked about regions that are akin and similar to South Asia, are there any leadership initiatives, any sort of best practices, we were talking about this earlier, that you would want to highlight for the benefit of other regions that are sort of scalable or politically replicable?
Well, first of all, let's think about COP30 as the next waypoint. I think one of the success metrics is what the Brazilian COP30 presidency has also highlighted, which is that this is a COP that will be focused on implementation. And in order for it to be an implementation-focused COP, we have to first recognize what is already happening in the region. So one of the efforts I'm putting into this, in addition to consulting with stakeholders in the region, is actually cataloging some of these actions, initiatives, programs that might be happening across our region. And it's important that the world knows about them. In order to scale up and accelerate those, so speed and scale is kind of the mantra that we need. What else do we need from COP? This is the so-called Baku to Belém roadmap of the 300 billion that was promised in Baku. How does it get to the 1.3 trillion in terms of required external climate finance? Getting that formulation right with the South Asian perspectives is critical. This is not just someone is going to come and hand you the money. It is what kind of money? What is the color of that money? At what cost? What does blended finance really mean? What is it blending? What kind of risk is it de-risking? Only when we get some clear answers to that can we say this initiative in Nepal is now going to get an extra investment. This initiative in Pakistan will get new boost for startups or distributed energy companies, etc. Until and unless we get those building blocks right, it'll feel like we did a lot, or we were trying to do a lot, but we're not getting that extra boost. The third thing that has to happen, and we started with this issue at the top of this conversation, is what are the indicators for the global goal on adaptation? Well, when we are saying we have to invest in our resilience, how do we track it? How do you and I know that the region is becoming more or less resilient? So this whole negotiation around 100 odd indicators for the global goal on adaptation will be extremely important, and I'm hearing this from South Asian stakeholders a lot. Recognize the importance of the coastlines, recognize the importance of the small island states, recognize the importance of the mountain countries. These are unique ecosystems and sociocultural systems. So these are certainly some of the things I would look out for, not just convey the concerns and the desires of the region, but look out for to see, was it, 5-star success, or was it 1-star needs improvement kind of COP? So that we have to focus on. But then beyond COP, I think we need to start thinking, and again, I'm hearing this a lot through my consultations, we have to start thinking outside of the COP process. What are the regional coordination initiatives that we can invest in? Is it on data sharing? Is it on risk mitigation? Is it on co-investment? Is it creating regional financing platforms? These are all ideas that have emerged from the dialogues Maybe not everything will see the light of day, but it's clearly also demonstrating that South Asia is not going to just sit on its hands waiting for someone to solve our problems. We would like the support, we would like partnership. We do not want to have finger pointing. We do not want to have, we do not want to be treated in a paternalistic way. We are empowered. We are resilient as societies. We've been through a lot, not just climate. And shining a spotlight on our collective resilience might be just the spark that is needed for a regional approach to dealing with a very grave crisis.
Well, thank you for that. This has been an exciting and insightful and very engaging conversation. Your perspectives, I'm sure, will be very valuable to everyone's tuning in. You know, as you said, South Asia is empowered, it's resilient, the communities, the society, they all feel deeply about their futures. The economic side is one, the political side is one, but it all kind of comes together when you look at how nature is acting. And not just in South Asia, but all across the globe now. Mm-hmm. So our job doesn't get done here. I think it only adds more to our to-do list once COP30 wraps up. Mm-hmm. And I'll be curious to see what you will do post-COP and your sort of analysis and assessments. And we'll try and get you back here for another conversation. Mm-hmm. But thank you once again for your time. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Please stay connected with the Asia Society Policy Institute, subscribe to our newsletters, and keep watching out for more. Thank you.